This is Miss Kennedy, and I am here to tell you another story, read you another story tonight. Seriously, Snow White was so forgetful. And this is the story of Snow White as told by the dwarves. And just so you guys know, I love these kinds of stories. These are fractured fairy tales. They're fairy tales that have been told from a different perspective. They're fairy tales that have kind of been shaken up. They take the traditional story and do a different version of it. A lot of times they do it from a different point of view or a different perspective. So somebody besides the main character is telling the story, or the story is about somebody besides that main character. So the real story of Snow White, that most of you are familiar with, is the Disney version. And Snow White is a little girl. She's a princess, and her father dies, and she's left with her evil stepmother, the queen. And the queen ask Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, who's the fairest of them all? And when the mirror answers Snow White, the queen gets jealous and decides to do away with Snow White. So she sends her off into the woods with the huntsman, and the huntsman's supposed to do away with her, and he takes pity on her and lets her go. So she finds this little cottage in the woods where the dwarves live, and she takes up residence with them, and they live a pretty happy life together until the queen realizes that Snow White wasn't killed after all, and that she's still the fairest of them all. And she goes to find Snow White at the dwarf's cottage, gives her a poisoned apple. She eats the apple, falls into a deep, deep sleep trance thing, and she's eventually woken by the prince with true love's kiss, and they live happily ever after. And that's kind of the basic story of Snow White, at least the Disney movie version. Well, this one is actually told by the dwarves. So you can see all these little men are her friends, the dwarves. And so it talks about, seriously, Snow White was so forgetful. And this is written by Nancy Lowen, and it's illustrated by Gerald Gerlais, Guerlais. And I love these types of books. And Nancy Lowen has also written a series of books. This one's about the Little Mermaid as told by the prince. This one is the story of the Frog Prince as told by the frog. So she really likes to write these fractured fairy tales, and they're so fun to read. You should check them out if you get a chance. I love Snow White dearly. She's a beautiful person, inside and out. But honestly, the girl's got a mind like a leaky bucket. I love when people use this kind of figurative language in their writing. A mind like a leaky bucket. What do you think that means? Let's take a minute and think. A mind like a leaky bucket. Well, we can see a leaky bucket has the water leaking out of it. So if your mind's like a leaky bucket, things go in, but they just kind of fall right back out. So she's really forgetful. It's another way of saying she's really forgetful. Here is the real story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. My name, by the way, is Seven. We dwarfs used to have real names, but Snow White couldn't remember them. One day we came home from the mines to find our cottage door open. We thought we had just been burgled, but no, it was just a lovely little girl sound asleep. There's little Snow White, and the dwarfs come home and they're like, "What is going on here?" In the morning, she had quite a story to tell. "Hello," she said. "I'm Snow White. The queen sent me into the woods, and the hunter was supposed to kill me, but he was nice and let me go, and I wandered a long time in the woods. I guess I'm very pretty, and that's why the queen doesn't like me. I'm Snow White. Would it be all right if I lived with you? I love playing house, and keeping house for you wouldn't be that different. Oh, would it? Did I tell you my name is Snow White?" Wow, did she have a lot of energy? Life with Snow White was interesting. She'd forget to turn on the stove. Then she'd forget to turn it off. She'd make banana cream pie and forget the bananas. She knit scarves that were 10 feet long because she just forgot to stop. On the bright side, she laughed at all our jokes and she never complained about anything. Years passed and Snow White grew up, but she didn't really change. She remained her sweet, charming, forgetful self. Then one day, Five heard a rumor. The queen knows Snow White is alive, he told us. The magic mirror spilled the beans. We gave Snow White orders to stay inside the cottage, and she was not to open the door for anyone. We knew the evil queen would try to hurt her. So there's the evil queen. But Snow White quickly forgot. Twice we came home to find her lying on the floor, and it was clearly the work of the queen. The first time, Snow White couldn't breathe. She was wearing a brand new corset that was laced too tightly. The second time, she had a poison comb in her hair. All the queen had to do was dress up as an old woman and offer her something pretty for sale, and any thoughts of being careful went right out of Snow White's head. We posted reminders. We even wrote, "Do not open the door" in syrup on her pancakes. So you can see I posted reminders everywhere. It says, "Do not open the door, do not open the door, do not open the door, do not open the door." And if you can look right in there, it says, "Do not open the door," written in syrup on her pancakes. Hmm. But once again, we came home to find Snow White on the floor. This time we couldn't help her. There was no corset to loosen or comb to remove. We thought she was dead, killed by a magical spell. And yet days passed and she remained as lovely as ever. "It's like she'd forgotten how to wake up," Five whispered. We couldn't make ourselves bury her, so we placed Snow White in a glass coffin and brought her to a spot on the mountainside and took turns guarding her. Thank goodness that's not the end of the story. One day I heard voices in the woods. "No, Your Majesty, it's not time for lunch. We ate our lunch an hour ago, don't you remember?" "Oh, right, silly me." Suddenly I was face to face with a prince, but he barely noticed me. He couldn't take his eyes off Snow White. "What happened to her?" he asked. "What's her name?" I told him the whole story. "Well, she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen," he breathed. "Those lips, those eyes. What did you say her name was? Could I take her with me? Now that I've seen her, I don't think I could live without her. Silky hair she has. Tell me again, what is her name?" I smiled. The prince reminded me of a certain someone. We were bringing Snow White back to the cottage so the other dwarfs could say goodbye. Without warning, the prince stopped and turned around. "Hey, what about lunch?" he asked. The servant slipped, the coffin slid, and Snow White coughed. I'd never heard such a beautiful noise. Out of her throat flew a bit of rosy red apple. Rosy red and poisoned apple, that is. She sat up and said, "Did someone say something about lunch?" she asked. Yes, Snow White married the prince, of course. And the queen actually showed up at the reception, if you can believe it. Everyone threw dinner rolls at her and booed her so loudly that she ran away and was never heard of again. Things are pretty normal now. When it gets cold outside, we're grateful for our 10-foot scarves, and every once in a while, we make banana cream pie without any bananas just for old time's sake. The end. So, fairy tales have been around for a long, long time, and there's so many different versions of the story of Snow White. There are so many different versions of Cinderella and all these different fairy tales, Sleeping Beauty. So many different cultures have different versions and different takes on them that it's a really interesting thing to research. So if you're looking to look into something like that, It is great to research. You can just go on a safe search, like Kindle.co, or even with your mom and dad, go on Google Safe Search and see, just put Snow White, versions of Snow White or versions of Cinderella, and kind of look through them with your mom and dad and see. You can probably even get some from our public library where they have lots and lots of books digitally. So you could get an ebook maybe to your tablet or your Fire device or something like that, your Kindle. And you could actually read some more of these awesome stories that are versions of Snow White or one of your other favorite fairy tales. And if you look up fractured fairy tales, there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of stories out there that are silly and funny and that kind of poke fun at fairy tales, but in a really happy, positive way. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I will see you tomorrow with another story. Always keep reading.